Good evening, you're watching World News Tonight on TVP World. I'm Aaron Darman. Donald Trump suspended American foreign aid on day one of his presidency. So has the US cut its support for Ukraine? More on that in just a moment. But first, these are your latest headlines. The White House promises to keep its NATO commitments, but only if allies pay their fair share. Plans to block asylum seekers at the German border pass in Parliament with the help of votes from the AfD. And will Russia repair the Nordstream gas pipeline? Denmark grants permission for work to start on the Baltic seabed. Donald Trump's move to freeze US foreign aid for 90 days has already become a major issue for countries around the world, including Ukraine. The order was temporarily blocked by a US judge, but that hasn't stopped Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy ordering a review of humanitarian programs that benefit from American assistance. Kazimierz Swysiak reports.
Out of the dozens of executive orders signed by Donald Trump in the first few days of his return to the US presidency, this one has sent some of the biggest shockwaves across the world.
Federal agencies must temporarily pause all activities related to obligation or disbursement of all federal financial assistance, including foreign aid, non-governmental organizations.
This temporary freeze has already impacted countries such as Ukraine. So much so that President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has ordered a review of all programs benefiting from US aid.
This concerns many areas, from communications and digitalization to support for veterans, schools, hospitals and reconstruction.
The Ukrainian government plans to extend the lifeline to the NGOs threatened most by the freeze, as many of them rely heavily on US funding. Since the beginning of the full-scale Russian invasion, the US Agency for International Development has provided $2.6 billion in humanitarian aid for Ukraine, $5 billion in development assistance and more than $30 billion in direct budget support. But Ukraine isn't the only country to have felt the impact of Donald Trump's foreign aid overhaul. NGOs in Georgia, a South Caucasus state ruled by a pro-Russian government, are also hurting from this decision.
This decision will have extremely negative impact, not only on long run, but immediately. From the beginning of May until today, the non-governmental organizations have been the main entities and actors who tried at least to impact the decisions of the Georgian government in terms of changing as policy orientation or for foreign policy orientation.
The freeze has surprised NGOs all across the world, from Thailand to Serbia. According to one expert, such moves from Donald Trump are meant to be a show of strength.
This is the latest reminder that our world is shifting towards hard power dynamics and a more realist geopolitics, a world where power and security actually prevail over democracy.
Donald Trump's order was blocked on Tuesday at the last minute by a US district judge who expressed concern over its potentially devastating impact both domestically and abroad. The court will review the order once again on Monday. 6 Democratic attorney generals have also filed a lawsuit against the decision to freeze federal aid in an effort to stop it from happening.
Okay, thank you very much.
The White House says Donald Trump will maintain America's commitment to NATO as long as allies devote 5% of their GDP to defence. It comes amid uncertainty over whether the US will remain in the bloc, with no country remotely close to reaching 5%, except Poland. Jeremi Chołodniuk has more.
When it comes to NATO defense spending, the new US administration's stance is quite clear. All members need to spend more.
As long as NATO pays their fair share, and President Trump has called on NATO allies to increase their defense spending to 5%. You actually saw the head of NATO at Davos last week on Bloomberg television saying that President Trump is right.
NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte's stance aligns with President Trump's. With the rising number of attacks on critical infrastructure in the Baltic Sea, Mark Rutte has yet again urged NATO members to make defense their utmost priority.
To keep NATO strong, we must, however, continue to adapt. And to guarantee our security in the future, we also need to ramp up our efforts now. That also means we need to spend more on our defense.
Addressing this issue last week, Trump said that while he expects allies to increase their spending, he doesn't believe this should apply to the US itself.
We're protecting them, you know. They're not protecting us, we're protecting them. So I don't think we should be spending, I'm not sure we should be spending anything, but we should certainly be helping them.
So far, no country meets the 5% criteria, but Poland is the closest, planning to allocate 4.7% of its GDP for this purpose this year. Other countries, however, are far behind.
This is a time when Europe cannot afford to save on security. I say this as the Prime Minister of a country that already spends almost 5% on security. And we spend that 5% not just on our own security, but the security of all of Europe.
Trump's request for NATO members to increase spending is nothing new. He was already vocal about it during his first term. The current push also stems from the fact that Washington spends more than all other NATO members combined. Trump used this argument to drum up support from a dissatisfied American public.
He needs to have a political win, and this could be something that he goes back to his domestic public and says, I managed to get the Europeans on board on increasing their defense spending.
For now, NATO's unity seems unwavering. But with Trump's request to increase spending, member states will have to seriously reconsider their stance if they want the North Atlantic Alliance to survive.
A motion to restrict asylum seekers has passed in the German parliament after a heated debate in Berlin. It was put forward by the opposition Conservatives and supported by the far-right AfD. Sascha Farbach reports.
The deadly attacks in Solingen, Magdeburg and Aschaffenburg have left their scars in Germany. And now the debate about migration and tightening the rules has taken center stage in the German parliament.
The migration question as the most visible crisis element of this malaise in which Germany finds itself.
With federal elections in Germany just weeks away, migration has become a linchpin topic for the nation. Conservatives proposed harsher policies, including tighter control checks as well as turning away asylum seekers at the border. The ruling coalition under Scholz accused the Conservatives of playing to the far-right AfD and Viktor Orban's Hungary.
The largest country in the EU would break EU law, as only Viktor Orban in Hungary has dared to do so far, with fatal signalling effects for other states. No German chancellor would ever have done such a thing.
The coalition partners have also claimed that the latest proposal endangered the so-called political firewall, which prevents mainstream parties working with the far right. Some experts see it differently.
No, I don't think it's the end of the firewall, and it's certainly not the end of the world or of German democracy. So the notion that the firewall has collapsed because a law might be passed by Bundestag only with the votes of AfD is the notion that is proposed by the current minority government.
In recent weeks, Friedrich Merz has stated several times that he will not work with the far-right AfD. With the recent events and the knife attack by an Afghan asylum seeker, the AfD has gained ground. Both motions in Parliament likely found favor with the far-right and will sharpen the discourse in the next weeks.
I repeat it here for the record. There will be no cooperation with the CDU in Germany under my leadership. And for reasons that are so clear and obvious, we will not work with a party that is xenophobic, that is anti-Semitic, that has right-wing extremists in its ranks, that has criminals in its ranks, a party that flirts with Russia and wants to leave NATO and the European Union.
Only one of the motions on restricting immigration was passed, namely rejecting asylum seekers at the border. It is, however, not a binding law, and the current coalition under Olaf Scholz is not obliged to implement it. Furthermore, any draft law still needs to be approved by the upper house, the Bundesrat. Much is in play, as this would only happen March 21st, long after elections in February. Overall, the political tone set these next days will be important. Berlin's role in Europe matters for key decisions, so any change in Germany will have an impact well beyond the country.
The election is definitely something that will have a great impact on the way that the EU is going, because Germany was traditionally an important motor of the EU, and it has gone missing for the last couple of years.
The motion's passing may be seen as a signal that a potential conservative government in Berlin will be tougher on migration. The stage is set for more political wrangling as Germans head to the polls in just under 3 weeks. Sascha Farbach, TVP World.
I will not be blackmailed. That's the blunt message from Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni over allegations she aided the release and deportation of a Libyan suspect wanted by the International Criminal Court. The investigation into the case is ongoing, even as Meloni's migration policy comes under the microscope. Piotr Mischuk has more.
This is Giorgia Meloni, Europe's most powerful politician according to Politico, but her politics in terms of migration have raised many eyebrows across Europe. Now she's under investigation for freeing and flying home Libyan man Osama El Masri Niem, who is suspected of murder, torture and rape. Meloni believes she did nothing wrong.
Now I believe that what was true yesterday remains true today. I will not be blackmailed. I will not allow myself to be intimidated, which is why I am, let's say, disliked by those who do not want Italy to change and become better. But it is precisely for this reason that I intend to continue on my path defending Italians, especially when national security is at stake, with my head held high and without fear.
The case will be examined by a Rome court, which seeks to establish who was behind the freeing of the Libyan suspect.
The prokurors decided to charge members of government responsible for this release, sending the man followed by international court by Italian plane to Libya. They have to explain what was going on.
The case is expected to further widen the divide between the country's government and the judiciary. Experts say Meloni and the 2 other members of her cabinet under scrutiny are highly unlikely to face any repercussions, as their coalition enjoys a fairly large majority in the parliament.
At the end of that preliminary investigation, the Parliament will have to vote on whether to continue on the investigation or not, unless the charges are dismissed already at the end of that preliminary investigation.
But it's not the first time Meloni's approach to migration has been frowned upon by many in Europe. In 2023, Italy came under fire after several shipwrecks were found with questions raised over Rome's ability to rescue migrants at sea.
I say this in particular days when the government, myself, have been accused of atrocious things, but my conscience is clear.
On Tuesday, Italy followed through the 3rd transport of migrants to its refugee centers in Albania as part of a first-of-its-kind relocation program. A total of 49 recently rescued asylum seekers from Bangladesh, Egypt, Ivory Coast and the Gambia arrived at the Albanian port of Shëngjin. But this strategy won't prove effective, according to experts.
Last year, which was pretty peaceful in terms of migration, Italy had 66,000 of migrants landing on its shore. 66,000 comparing to 46 after months of basically propaganda saying that we have found solutions for migration. Let's get serious.
The deal with Albania, which was signed at the end of 2023, for now has been a massive flop, a huge cost of money and resources, and absolutely zero impact.
The first 2 groups of refugees were sent to Albania in October and November, but following a decision by a Rome court, Italy was ordered to take back the migrants. Tuesday's transfer marks the 3rd attempt to fill 2 Italy-run refugee centers in Albania, which had been empty since November.
Denmark has given the green light for a subsidiary of Nordstream 2, owned by Russian company Gazprom, to seal the pipeline running from Russia to Germany. So could Russia start sending its gas supplies back to Europe? Anastasia Yanchenko reports.
The decision was made by the Danish Energy Agency, citing environmental and safety reasons. According to the Danish agency, the pipeline's gas poses a potential environmental threat, making repair work necessary to prevent further leaks.
There is an environmental issue, and this gas is flowing out at the moment, and the main idea is to close the pipelines and to keep them in a condition that the gas is not flowing out. So I think the main aim, as I understand it from the Danish side, is to not further pollute also the ground of the Baltic Sea.
The Nord Stream 2 pipeline was intended to provide a direct gas supply line from Russia to Germany, bypassing transit countries such as Ukraine and Poland. Nord Stream 1 pipeline was shut down by Russia in response to EU sanctions against the country after its invasion of Ukraine. The Nord Stream 2 pipeline has never been operational.
Nord Stream 2 is blocked by US sanctions, and also it has not been certified in Germany.
The sabotage of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline occurred in September 2022. As a result of underwater explosions in the exclusive economic zones of Denmark and Sweden, 3 out of 4 pipelines were damaged. Experts' opinions are divided. Some fear that repairing the pipeline could lead to a resumption of Russian gas supplies to Europe, while others believe that the new US administration is opposed to Russian gas flowing to Europe.
It is an opportunity to make Nord Stream 2 work in future, and we already know that there are people on both sides of Europe, in Russia and also in some Western European countries, who are lobbying for restarting Nord Stream 2.
Don't think that Donald Trump has any interest of Russian gas flowing to Germany or to Europe, and he will do everything to prevent this.
Polish President Andrzej Duda sharply criticized the idea of restoring the pipeline, saying that both pipelines should be completely dismantled as they pose a great threat to Europe.
I believe the Nord Stream pipelines should be dismantled. This pipeline causes a very big threat to Ukraine, to Poland, to Slovakia, but also to other Central European countries.
Given the fact that Nord Stream 2 AG is fully owned by the Russian state company Gazprom, the Danish authorities have introduced oversight measures to prevent any unauthorized actions.
Pressure is ramping up on Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić as demonstrations in the country continue. Serbia's ruling coalition have begun talks to form a new government after the resignation of the Prime Minister. But protesters say it's not just about replacing top officials. Alex Sumlinsky reports.
Serbia's President Aleksandar Vučić seemed to be all smiles on Wednesday as he hosted the UK's Minister of State for Europe and North America in Belgrade for talks focused on strengthening Serbian-UK bilateral relations. A stark difference in his demeanor from Tuesday evening, when Vučić announced his party would take 10 days to decide whether to form a majority government or hold a snap parliamentary election. The announcement came after Prime Minister Miloš Vučević stepped down from his post amid ongoing protests in Serbia that have brought its streets to a standstill.
First of all, we have completely fulfilled or disclosed everything we had, and thus fulfilled all the demands made by the students.
Except the students and other protesters say that's not what the anti-government demonstrations are about, and protests on Serbia's streets are heating up.
We are not asking for the resignations of officials, but rather for the fulfillment of the demands, that this state truly becomes a state of law, instead of being a police state, and that we turn an autocracy into a democracy.
The protests that started in November came after a roof collapsed at a railway station in the city of Novi Sad, which killed 15 people. The protesters have since called for accountability from those responsible and accused government officials of corruption and negligence.
The people are determined to see this through because 12 years of a system in which corruption has been growing, where there are clear elements of captured state and unindependent institutions that should be independent in a democratic system with a separation of powers and checks and balances is not yet there.
The protests have shaken Vučić, a populist who has held a grip on power since he became prime minister in 2014 and president in 2017. In Tuesday's speech, he said an interim government is out of the question, but experts say that would actually be a step to bring about change in the country.
In the opposition circles and among some intellectuals that support the demonstrations, the students' protests and the civic protests, there is a demand that a transitional government is formed whose function would be actually to arrange that the next elections are without all those limitations and irregularities that we have faced in the past.
For the time being, Serbia's EU accession remains on hold, with no chapters opened since 2021. The opening of the Competitiveness and Inclusive Growth Cluster has been moved to 2025. Under the condition, Serbia makes significant progress, including in rule of law reforms. It is these rule of law issues that lie at the core of the demands of Serbian protesters.
And joining me now to discuss Serbia and what's next for the country is Volodymyr Zelenskyy, former European Parliament Standing Rapporteur for Serbia. Good evening, sir.
Good evening. Very good to be here.
A pleasure to have you with us. Can I start with the pictures that are coming out of Serbia right now? For months, students have led these protests and blockades, many with the catch cry, "Let's take freedom into our hands." What is it exactly that they are pushing for, and will they get it?
Well, these protests are quite different from some of the series of protests we saw before in Serbia. And I should say at the outset that protests are frequent in Serbia. They are part of the political landscape in this country. They are not anything unusual or extraordinary. This time around, the students, however, have organized themselves in a very apolitical way. These are not protests which would be led by the political opposition. These are civic protests, and they have gained momentum and have not weakened. On the contrary. I think it is very important that the state, the authorities, very much engage with the students, with those protesting, and there is a dialogue, and there are also concrete steps which help calm down the situation and also answer the demands which have been raised by the public, which are very much tied to the tragedy from the 1st of November, which took place in Novi Sad, when part of the roof of the railway station killed 15 people. This is what was the immediate spark of the protest, but they've since continued and become very much organized and led by students who have been supported by the members of the faculty, but also other segments of the society. I think there has to be ultimately a civic and institutional solution to these protests. And what does differentiate them again from the past protests is that they are indeed civic and student-led. So it's very difficult to say at the moment what will be the political consequences of this in terms of the political landscape, because that hasn't changed. What is important, and I think this is an extremely important sign that there are consequences being drawn by the governing authorities, is that Prime Minister Vučić resigned. And there are now discussions about what happens next. Either there is going to be a new government based on the composition of the existing parliament, or perhaps there will be new elections as early as April this year.
Certainly a complex situation, and like you mentioned, we've already seen the Prime Minister resign, sort of quit to try and reduce those tensions. When you talk about that potential political change or the inability to, in a way, read the tea leaves on what will happen, do you think, though, this could be the end or the beginning of the end of President Vučić? And do you feel like that the Prime Minister's resignation has had any impact?
Well, look, the President Vučić has his mandate until 2027, and I don't see anything in this protest which would suggest that that mandate will be shortened. I think that mandate will be fully carried out by President Vučić, who, by the way, won the last presidential elections quite decisively and does have a strong mandate in the society. However, there has already been a talk for weeks, even before the resignation of Prime Minister Vučević, about a serious shakeup to the government and also serious consequences stemming from the revelations and the lessons following up on that tragedy in Novi Sad. And I think this is crucial. People want to see justice delivered. People want to see the facts. People want to see proper investigation. People want to see lessons learned and consequences from this tragedy where clearly somebody made a mistake or something went wrong. And it is extremely important that the public knows. And I think this is one of the issues that will help calm things down. And there has to be, I think, an institutional solution and guarantees also by those holding power that indeed there are going to be consequences. So this is what I see as crucial. I don't see that the president is going to go anywhere. On the contrary, I see that there is a beginning of an institutional solution, and either there is going to be a fundamental shakeup and a new government on the basis of the existing parliament, or there will be new elections. And here, what is, I think, extremely interesting to watch is how these student-led protests, independent from political forces, are going to transform the political landscape. Will they result in any changes in public preferences or an emergence of new political actors? I think this is the most interesting question in terms of the future of Serbia's democracy.
And when we talk about this institutional shift, do you think that, I mean, some of these protests, they centre around, obviously, this tragedy and more deeper, this alleged state corruption. Do you think that Serbia is corrupt?
Look, there is corruption in every society. Of course, all it takes is to read just the reports also by the European Commission. Indeed, there are problems and there should be a real improvement. Serbia has made important progress also on the way to the European Union. Serbia has made important economic progress, especially in recent years. And I think what one of the messages is from those protesting is that I think people recognize that Serbia is moving, but not everybody is happy how things are done. And that also includes questions about potential corruption, questions about the way justice works in the country, questions about transparency. And I think these are important issues for the people who recognize that there is progress, but are not happy how this is done. I think it is important to draw lessons from this. And that also includes focused fight against corruption, focused fight for a better state of rule of law, justice, and ultimately this is going to help accelerate Serbia's progress towards membership in the EU, because I think on the economic side, Serbia has performed very well. And I think it is important to follow up also on the side of public institutions and politics.
Do you have any sense of how likely a snap election could be?
I have no sense. We should, however, recognize that early elections are not an exception, but rather quite common, also in the case of Serbian politics. I think a lot will depend on developments in the next few days. What is important is to watch the deadline, which was announced by President Vučić. He did say that the decision would be made within 10 days. Either the country will go for early elections, or there is going to be a new government. But I should also say that early elections are unlikely to produce a fundamentally different makeup of the parliament, because the opposition has been weak, has been divided, is not leading this protest, is not part of this protest. So the big question is how this protest, I think, will help transform politics in Serbia, not in the next few weeks, but rather in the next few months or couple of years? I think this is the key question. So even if there are early elections, I don't expect a fundamental change in the makeup of political forces based on what we have and what we know now. I think what is more important is that the messages from this protest are taken seriously, and that people have a sense that the authorities are listening to them and are taking up the demands which have to do with justice, freedom, and a certain sense of citizenship and equality.
Vladimir Bilčík, former European Parliament Standing Rapporteur for Serbia, thank you again for your time.
Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
And that's all for World News tonight. Do stay with us here on TVP World. I'm Aaron Darman. Good night.